Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Tuesday. Tonight, managing expectations.
We're in ongoing discussions with the Americans, and I wouldn't overplay it.
How does the Prime Minister look in the eyes of the very workers that he sold out and betrayed?
Prime Minister Mark Carney playing it safe ahead of a planned sit-down with U.S. President Donald Trump as trade war whiplash dominates domestic politics. We're going to dig into that and bad tax advice.
If you're asking about a personal income tax question or a general one, you're unlikely to get an accurate response.
The Auditor General rips into the Canada Revenue Agency, slamming the performance of call centres, finding Canadians face long waits and risk getting inaccurate information if they do manage to speak to an agent. We're going to bring in the Secretary of State responsible for the CRA, Wayne Long, in moments. Plus, budget or bust?
When I see opposition parties not ruling out the possibility of voting for the budget, that's starting to worry me.
Government House Leader Steve McKinnon says Liberals are ready for an election if the upcoming budget gets voted down, raising the stakes of the Fed's first fiscal plan even higher. Our front bench is set to break that down. Louis Hammond, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone will all be here a little bit later on in the show. First, though, we'll start tonight with more instability on the trade war front with the U.S. Industry Minister Melanie Joly started the morning by pledging a response to automaker Stellantis' decision to pack up shop in Brampton and move production to the U.S. by end of day today. At this hour, though, no word from the feds on what that response will be. Meanwhile, GM has decided to end production of EV vans at its Ingersoll, Ontario plant. All of that happening as speculation ramps up a trade deal with the U.S. on aluminum and steel, could be coming. Prime Minister didn't want to attach himself to a specific timeline on that today, but the Fed's domestic response will come in 2 weeks with his first federal budget, one the government's House leader acknowledged the minority Liberals may not be able to pass.
What we're seeing is our opposition parties, the Bloc Québécois, who, without having even read the budget, eliminate the possibility that they will support it, and the Conservatives making just ludicrous demands with respect to the budget.
It sounds like you're worried about maybe Canada going to another election. Is that a realistic possibility Canadians should expect?
When I see opposition parties not ruling out the possibility of voting for the budget, that's starting to worry me, but I think it's them that are misreading the mood of Canadians. If an election is necessary, we would obviously, reluctantly, because we don't think Canadians want an election, but election there will be.
Now, all of that comes as the Auditor General releases a scathing report on the service the Canada Revenue Agency provides Canadians, looking at contact call centres, which for the 24-25 fiscal year received 10 million of 32 million calls. Another 14 million were diverted to automated services, and more than 7.5 million were dropped. Those who got through to an agent waited an average of almost 33 minutes. Once callers did get through, the Auditor General's office found through testing that they risked getting a lot of inaccurate information. For non-account specific calls, for example, the AG found call center agents only provided accurate responses to questions on individual taxes 17% of the time. They gave accurate responses on benefits 56% of the time and accurate responses on business taxes 54% of the time. Wayne Long is the Secretary of State for the Canada Revenue Agency, and he's with me live in studio right now. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you again. Thank you for making the time.
Always, Vashi. Great to be here.
I thought one of the more interesting conclusions reached in this report by the Auditor General was that there is a direct link between the number of agents staffing these call centers and their ability to respond to calls. So I have a very simple first question. In that budget I just spoke about coming down in 2 weeks, will you cut call center staff?
I would say this. I would think that, first off, I want to thank CRA staff, the public servants. I think they're world class. They've delivered Canada Child Benefit, Disability Tax Credit, benefits back to Canadians. Where would a lot of Canada be without the CRA with respect to COVID benefits? So, you know what, like I said to you last time, I wouldn't prejudge the CER. We are looking at every option with respect to the CRA. We have weekly meetings now with Commissioner Hamilton. We are in regular dialogue with the president of UTE, Mark Briere. And we are looking for ways to support call center staff, I'm not prepared to say we're going to cut. I'm not prepared to say we're going to add. We're looking at it. We're going to make service better. Canadians deserve service. They deserve timely service, quick service, and most importantly, accurate service. And I do want to say, I take the Auditor General's report as constructive criticism, and we certainly accept her findings, and we're going to continue to improve.
Why are you unable to say what you're going to do at staffing levels? I understand that there might be other mechanisms in play that could improve service on the margins, but the Auditor General is pretty unequivocal about the link between the levels of staffing and the ability to meet even very basic service standards like answering 65% of calls in 15 minutes. The only time that happened was after the pandemic when the staffing levels were at 7,000. At the end of May, they were at 3,500, half that, right? She points out, I think word for word, the number of agents available directly impacts the agency's ability to respond to callers requesting to talk to an agent and to meet its service standard. If the link is that clear, why can't you be as clear?
Well, I mean, let's look at, let's go back. I mean, we came up with a 100-day plan on September 2nd. Call access for Canadians was, obviously needed a lot of room for improvement. It was as low as 17%. We've enacted a 100-day plan. We're working with, obviously, the union, Commissioner Hamilton, the wonderful public servants. We've increased that 17% within 2 weeks to 34%, up to 57%. To 77%. I'm pleased to say that as of last week, we were at almost 89% now of calls answered within 15 minutes. That is market improvement. And one thing that I've always believed in, whether I was in small business or in politics, was accountability, holding leadership accountable for improved service. As you know, I was sworn in as Secretary of State for CRA in May. A lot of the Auditor General's work is before that point. So, I'm worried about the future. I think now we're on the right plan. The 100-day plan is working. We are reallocating. We're not necessarily throwing more people at that. So I would argue back that we haven't really added employees right now. We've extended
the bleeding. You stemmed, to be clear, you were going to get rid of even more people, and you decided to extend the contracts of 850 people. Doesn't that show that had a direct impact on the level of service?
No, not at all. In fact, the Auditor General's report was much prior to even when I was sworn in. I believe it was March, April. I came in May. We are working with the leadership on a weekly basis. We are setting goals. We are reallocating some resources, but it's not as easy as just saying, we're going to add more people and we're not going to cut. We're looking at every option. We're looking at equipping the call center workers with better digital services. We're looking upstream to see where the bottlenecks are. And I'm really, really happy with where we're at. Again, it's not necessarily about adding or subtracting. It's about looking at where we are, assessing it, getting a baseline, which I think we haven't had in a long time, and getting Canadians the service they deserve. I'm really, really confident that we're going to get there. And I think Canadians already, we're certainly hearing it in our constituency offices. I mean, obviously, I'm very tuned to it. I talk to people on the street. I talk to people in the government lobby. Our service standards are getting better. Think about it. We went from 17% to 89% answered now within 15 minutes. That is remarkable improvement.
How much accurate information is being provided? And I take your point around, maybe necessarily adding doesn't, I don't have proof that that's necessarily going to be something. But I think what this report does show is that subtracting does have an impact. That is exactly what happened. When they were able to meet the service standards, they had a certain level of employees. When those the level of employees were cut, forget about adding, were cut, there was a direct impact on the ability of them. Because it's not just meeting the service standard, it's actually being able to deliver accurate information and not deflect 8 million calls a year, which they also did last year.
Right, I'm just trying to find a baseline. Again, we're working with Commissioner Hamilton, we're working with UTE President Mark Briere. We've had lots of conversations also with the Ombudsman, Francis Beaulieu.
But you can't say you won't cut any more call service agents.
No, I can't say I'm not going to cut. I'm not saying we're going to add. I think we want a baseline. We want to make sure that Canadians get the service they deserve. And that's, equipping the call center operators with the right digital service package, making sure our AI systems are proper, making sure, like case in point, 300,000 Canadians called the CRA to have their accounts unlocked.
I know.
300,000.
I read it in the
right.
Yeah.
So if we can start to improve those things, take some pressure off the calls, make our AI bots, if you will, more effective, feed them more information, then Canadians won't have to call. They won't have to wait in line. Another thing I wanted to point out is that we're looking at call scheduling. Instead of Canadians being frustrated on the phone, and we certainly have, many Canadians have been there, I certainly acknowledge that. Instead of waiting for too long, now we want to implement a service where they can actually schedule a call. The CRA agent will then call them back. They'll be prepared, obviously on both sides. We'll make sure we have the right agent call for the right thing. Call scheduling is working in our MP offices with respect to IRCC now. So again, there's lots of room for improvement.
But a lot of that was identified back in 2017. There were even recommendations from the Auditor General's report at the time to implement the simplest of features in which, and there's an automated way of telling the person on the line how long the wait will be. None of that was ever adopted. Very, very little of it. And your party was in charge in 2017 and is in charge now. Why should Canadians trust you to actually lift what you're saying, what you're promising tonight you will?
Well, as you may or may not know, I used to be in the hockey business. And that would be like asking, somebody 7 years before I got there why season tickets weren't sold or why there weren't as many people going to games. I'm focused on...
not if you were related, just as, it's the same party in the government. Yeah,
but it's a new government. Prime Minister Carney is keenly focused on improvements. I talk to him, quite often about the CRA and where we're going. And you know what? I'm about looking forward. To stand still is to go backwards. I want to move forward. I want to move forward with a plan. We're working with all parties. Again, the public servants are not to blame. I'll be very clear on that. They haven't been equipped. They haven't had the right digital service packages. They've been overwhelmed because they haven't had the support around them. I am absolutely determined to get a baseline, what we need, what we don't need, how calls are allocated, how calls are distributed, and we are seeing improvements. Now, the 100-day plan is one part of the process. The Auditor General's report, we take it, we accept it, we will learn from it, and we will continue to move. I have also asked the CRA to come back with a 3- and 5-year plan as to where we want to go as a entity, how we can continue to improve. And I think I said to you before, I'm all about stretch goals. Shoot for the stars, and if you hit the moon, I'm happy.
And I appreciate the ambition.
Sure.
But ultimately, people like me who represent Canadians are going to have to hold you to account on something specific. Is it just that you want that service standard to be met and exceeded? Is it that you'd like more than 17% of the responses to contain accurate information? At the end of the 100 days, what will we judge you by, and what specific metrics?
Well, one point on the 17%, I do want to clarify. That was 167 calls.
Yeah.
Only.
A sample size that they chose.
Yeah, of 167. CRA samples 100,000 people a year. Our numbers were almost at 90%. So, for example, 17%, somebody would call CRA and ask when they'd filed. And let's assume the CRA agent said April 30th, which would be accurate. And April 30th was on a Sunday. So they wouldn't file on April 30th, they'd file the next day. Well, that would be classified as inaccurate information. So a lot of that inaccurate information...
I feel like you're dismissing, though, the Auditor General's
not at all.
Conclusion, which is the onus is on the taxpayer in this country, and it doesn't feel like the taxpayer is being served. That is what she said with accurate information.
Yeah, and we don't dispute her findings. We will learn from her findings.
You're trying to downplay them, though.
Yeah, I believe in accountability. I believe in admitting where there's room for improvement. I am absolutely driven to work as a team collaboratively with the Commissioner, with UTE President, and we will get this right. We will make it better. We are making, I'm highly encouraged with 89%. I'm not saying, hey, we've done a great job and it's all over, but that shows me that if we focus, if we're strategic, if we shift a little bit here and there.
Are they giving accurate
improvement.
information, though? Because right now their performance evaluations are done mostly containing information about whether they're getting on the call at the right time in their schedules, not about the actual content of the calls. Isn't that important, too?
It's extremely important. Tax case related information was much higher than that. That was non-tax case, the 17%.
Higher than 50%? Are we supposed to rejoice in that number?
Not at all. Lots of room lots of room for us to grow, lots of room for us to learn. But again, I believe in accountability. I was a business person before I was in politics. We are forming great relationships. We're going to get baselines. We're going to improve from there. And then long term, once we're past the 100-day plan, it's not like, oh, 100-day plan's over, good for us, look at us. I want to see a 3- and 5-year outlook. We're going to look at AI, digital service packages, whatever we can do to improve service. Canadians deserve an accurate, quick, and responsive CRA, and we will get there.
Okay, Minister, I have to leave it on that. I've taken enough of your time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it as always.
Pleasure, Vashi.
Minister Wayne Long is the Secretary of State who oversees the CRA. In the meantime, pressure remains on the Prime Minister to negotiate tariff relief for this country. Here is Mark Carney's response this morning when our Judy Trin asked if there could be movement on sectoral tariffs at the upcoming APEC summit.
We'll see. We're ongoing discussions with the Americans, and I wouldn't overplay it. I'm looking forward to see the president at APEC in Korea, but we're going to be seeing lots of other countries, and one of our core elements of our strategy is diversifying trade. That's why we're going to Asia. You saw the Indonesian trade deal. We're in talks with ASEAN, which is the group of countries that I'm meeting with in Kuala Lumpur, and then more broadly at APEC, including with China.
And Ontario's anti-tariff ad campaign is getting attention south of the border. The province launched a $75 million ad blitz using a famous Ronald Reagan speech to underscore, in their view, the value of Canada-U.S. trade and push back against tariffs. That ad reached Donald Trump's TV.
And I even see foreign countries now that we are doing very well with taking ads. Don't go with tariffs. They're taking ads. I saw an ad last night from Canada. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also. But they're actually on television taking ads. But I do believe that everybody's too smart for that.
And here's Ontario's premier on that.
I heard that the president heard our ad. I'm sure he wasn't too happy, but it's real because it was coming from the best president the country's ever seen, Ronald Reagan. So it's very effective. It's probably one of the best ads I've ever seen, and it's coming from Ronald Reagan's voice. And it's going to be focused right across the country, but also in Republican-held areas, because what I feel, the Reagan Republicans are going to be fighting with a MAGA group. And let's hope Reagan Republicans win.
We've got a lot to unpack ahead with the front bench. Louis Hammond, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone will be here. After a short break, however, courting Canada, Germany and Norway are trying to pitch their submarines as the federal government seeks a contractor to build a new fleet. Both of those countries' defense ministers will be here in studio for an exclusive conversation with us next.
The good news is we've down-selected to 2 suppliers, so that's going to make this whole process much more efficient, much more timely. Look, obviously we're looking for as many industrial benefits as we can get. Canada needs all the investments it can get. Canada is reasserting its defense sector prowess, if I can say. We're building more industries. We're increasing the number of companies. We're already involved in many, many, many ways with, for example, shipbuilding right across the country. So we'll see what that negotiation bears fruit, how it bears fruit for us.
Defense Minister David McGuinty being courted by countries that want to sell us military submarines. The contenders, South Korea's Hanwha and Germany's TKMS, a joint venture of sorts between Germany and Norway. Prime Minister Mark Carney will be in South Korea in a matter of days, and defense ministers for Germany and Norway have just wrapped up a mission to Ottawa. And with me here in studio for more on that, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius and Norwegian Defense Minister Tor Sandvik. Hello to you both. Pleasure to welcome you both here to studio, but also here to Canada. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you very much. Hello, thank you.
Hello, Minister Pistorius. I will start with you. And I know a lot of Canadians right now are interested in, of course, the potential acquisition of submarines. I know that you met yesterday, I believe, with Minister Joly, who oversees the industry portion of it, and Minister McGuinty, of course, your counterpart in defense. I was wondering if you got the sense that they are in a rush to make a decision on this.
They are, definitely. They are in a rush, and we all need to hurry up and to ramp up in what we are doing. And so my impression is absolutely clear. They see exactly what it is about.
There has been some speculation, Minister Sandvik, that if there is a decision, it could come as soon as the end of this year. How soon, if that were to be the case, how soon could the submarines that your countries are jointly producing, how soon could they arrive in Canada if that were the case?
I think Boris have to answer that because they are producing in Germany. We are here as a proud partner of this project, but also as a happy customer. So we are here. We are joining. I'm joining Boris on this trip because we think that this project is getting better if Canada is on board in this project. And as I understood from the talks we had here today, both with the industry but also from Boris, that we can deliver on, they can deliver on the delivery time which is needed for Canada.
Let me follow up, if I could, on the point that you're making about sort of the relationship between the three countries and how this would amplify that. How would it, in your view? Why is that part of the sort of sales pitch, if I could put it so crassly?
It's, I have to say, now Europe is stepping up, taking more responsibility for our armed defenses. And you know, we are going to spend 5% of GDP. So we're not just going to spend more, but we have to spend better. So we need to have partnerships. We are buying the similar submarines as Germany, so we can maintain them together. We can have spare parts together. We can stockpile together. We can train. Yeah, and we can train together and also sail together. I really think if Canada joins, this will be the world's largest conventional submarine fleet. This will strengthen this partnership. It will be more stamina in case of crisis or in the worst case of war, to have the spare parts we need to keep this going, but also to have the ammunition for it and to have the crew for it, and also to maintain them, because you always have to maintain submarines. So for us, widening this partnership with an ally like Canada, which is like Norway, a maritime Arctic nation, which knows this area well, like we do, but also because we are threatened by the same aggressor, Russia. Will be, that's the benefit for Norway in this.
And I have some questions about that threat in a moment, but Minister Pistorius, I do want to sort of jump off that point and ask you as well. Sort of the proposition to Canada, because of course the competitor in this is the South Koreans, but what I heard very much during this visit was about the sort of interoperability and the idea that three NATO allies would be working together on something like this. In your view, as concisely as possible, what is the advantage of that?
The advantage is just laying on the table. It is more interoperability, more interchangeability, but in particular is the joint perspective on the Northern Atlantic of the High North and on the Indo-Pacific as well. I mean, we all face the reality. In the northern part of our world, Russia is remilitarizing the region. China is present, so we have to face that together, and we have to go against it together. So that we have to deter and to defend ourselves. And if we do that jointly with joint procurement, joint development of weapons and systems, and everything Tora mentioned earlier, then we are strong enough to do that. And we do that on the base of same values, same perspectives, and of the experience of much reliability.
And if I could follow up on that, because part of what you're talking about is vis-a-vis the threat from China and Russia. There's sort of a different type of threat that Canada and other countries are dealing with from an economic perspective, and that is the change in posture from the United States, right? And in particular, that has, it feels like, from my perspective, altered the lens through which Canadians are looking at a lot of these big procurement projects, big acquisitions, and it's kind of, what does it mean for Canadian economic growth, for creation of Canadian jobs? I wondered if you could reflect on that for a moment, because I've read everything from, after the first one, they could be produced here, to the maintenance could happen here in Canada. Is there a specific aspect that has been pitched to the Canadian government? What are you willing to kind of consider in that vein?
Well, in the first place, that's a decision of the industry, of course, because this is not a public industry, it's not a state-governed industry, it's a private industry. But still, they are quite clear, and the experience of TKMS is quite clear to see too, because 41% of their productions of submarines in the past 80 years were placed in the countries they procured. So this is the first point. The second point is, Of course, there are a broad variety of fields of cooperation, not only in military aspects, not only in aspects of producing that submarines, but as well beyond in civilian fields like raw materials, like automotive, like battery production and so on. But for example, this is from my perspective very important as a defense minister, we will procure the very, very excellent combat management system from Canada for our entire Navy. We will buy at least 18 global aircraft in the years to come, maybe even more when it comes to global eye. We invest in the 5 years to come 35 billion euros, only Germany, in the space. So, and we are looking for partners like Norway and like Canada. So there is a huge variety of fields of cooperation with the benefit of jobs and money in Canada.
But just so that I'm clear, I know you were saying it's industry, right? But is there, do you think, a specific, like, is it clear that there needs to be a specific kind of proposition on the table for Canadian benefit?
That's the mutual perspective on that. We are partners. Let me say it in other words. We are not talking about just selling some submarines. It's not about phrases. We are offering reliable partnership, relationship for decades to come. Selling submarines will mean, in our perspective, we maintain for decades together. We develop together. For example, Canada and the European Union are just developing the anti-torpedo torpedo, which is a new system which will create jobs in Canada too. So this is only one part of all the fields we are working on. And then, of course, our interest is, as Germany, for example, not only to stay the 6th or the 5th biggest investor in Canada, but being even improving.
And I have questions about that in a moment. I did want to get sort of your assessment, though, Minister Sandvik, about the threat environment, because what we're talking about, as member countries of NATO, is greatly expanding, as you mentioned, in your case, 5%. In our case, we've finally put out a path to hit even the initial goal of 2% on defense spending. The threat, as you see it, recently we have seen an increased number of incursions, for example, by Russia into European airspace. What should we read into that?
I think, first and foremost, the threat is Russia in Ukraine. If Putin succeeds in Ukraine, then it's getting dangerous, not only for Europe, but for all the world. First and foremost, for a rule-based order, but also because he will then come after more countries. But we can say Putin is losing heavily on the battleground in Ukraine. He's lost 1 million soldiers. He's losing 1,000 to 1,500 each day on the battlefield in Ukraine. But we know, as a neighbor of Russia in the north, in the Arctic, that they still have the Northern Fleet intact. They still have the strategic submarines with the nuclear warheads intact. They still have the attacking submarines, the multi-role submarines, which threaten pipelines, which threatens internet cables and power cables on the subsea ground, and which threatens the transportation lines, the transatlantic transportation lines. So we say that we need to deter Russia, and we need to follow what's happening in the north, in the Kola Peninsula. The shortest way to North America, to Canada, is over the North Pole for the nuclear warheads at the Kola Peninsula. Norway is NATO's airs and ice in the north. We're watching that 24/7. And we know that they are testing new missiles, hypersonic missiles. They're testing nuclear-driven torpedoes up there, up in the north. So we're looking after that. So bringing partners into this and bringing deterrence into this with new submarines, with new frigates that we buy in a strategic partnership with the UK. And also, of course, standing with the alliance and spend better, interoperable, and thinking this as a family who's going to stay together for decades and develop these systems together. This is the most important part for Norway. But I would say the threat from Russia is first and foremost if Putin succeeds in Ukraine. The heroic battle and fight from the Ukrainians, they fight for all of Europe's security and not for the world's security as well.
Do you think Putin has any, there is any willingness on his part at all, Minister Pistorius, to put an end to the war on Ukraine?
Not at all, rather in the opposite. I mean, I would like to remind everybody of you on his speech he held on the Valdai dialogue in November of which almost nobody in the Western world took notice of, really. And he said, we are at the beginning of a relentless struggle for a new world order, which is very serious. I mean, this is not an invitation for a coffee or a drink. This is a clear announcement what he's heading, of what he's heading to. So we have a threat, and there's no willingness at all to negotiate peace. Every attempt, every try of Donald Trump and others failed because he didn't want. So therefore, we have to increase the pressure by supporting Ukraine even more than before. And I know, for example, that the Canadians are emotionally and mentally the biggest supporter of Ukraine, and they do a lot in material support. And we should, Norway, Germany, and other countries, even proceed.
Just very quickly, if I could follow up on that, your point about a lack of willingness. There was supposed to be a meeting this week, for example, in person. Canceled. What does that say?
What we supposed all the time. Donald Trump is trying something, the one or the other, but Putin pretends to be willing and to agree to negotiate, but at the end he doesn't. And what he's doing all the time is gaining time, winning time to gain territory in Ukraine and to create facts. And this is what we should face realistically.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. Minister Pistorius, Minister Sandvik, I appreciate your time very much. A pleasure.
Thank you very much, Vashi.
Coming up, we'll turn back to domestic politics. Could a federal election be on the way? Government House Leader Steve McKinnon said today that he's worried about the federal budget passing while also dismissing some demands from opposition parties. Our front bench with Louis Hammond, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone. They're back with me, I should say, in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
What we're seeing is our opposition parties, the Bloc Québécois, who, without having even read the budget, eliminate the possibility that they will support it, and the Conservatives making just ludicrous demands with respect to the budget.
It sounds like you're worried about maybe Canada going to another election. Is that a realistic possibility Canadians should expect?
When I see opposition parties not ruling out the possibility of voting for the budget, that's starting to worry me, but I think it's them that are misreading the mood of Canadians. If an election is necessary, we would obviously, reluctantly, because we don't think Canadians want an election, but election there will be.
An election there will be. That's Government House Leader Steve McKinnon saying he's worried about support for the upcoming federal budget while criticizing some opposition parties for dismissing the budget before seeing it. He also called budget demands from the Conservatives, quote, ludicrous. Opposition parties contend, though, the minister is flipping the script and that the onus is instead on the government to secure support, not the other way around. Could Canadians really be headed to the polls sometime soon? Let's bring in our front bench. Louis Hammond was a senior advisor to Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne. A warm welcome to the panel tonight, Louis. Larissa Weller is the founder of Henley Strategy. She's a former head of communications for Ontario's Conservative Premier Doug Ford. Kathleen Monk is former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk and Associates. And Laura Stone rounds us out tonight. She's a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy almost election, I guess. I'm joking. Laura, I'll start with you. I thought it was a very interesting comment from the minister from a political perspective, because it's a lot of sort of pre-budget political positioning, very much an effort to put the onus on the opposition moving forward, which I thought was, certainly something that stood out to me. What do you think he was trying to do there?
Well, it strikes me that he says he's worried, but he's not really worried, because I think if you look at where the Liberal government is sitting right now in relation to the opposition, they're looking pretty good if an election were to be called. Look, I don't think that the government does want one, because I don't think the public wants one, right? We can't have elections every 6 months in this country. But I think the Liberals are positioning themselves as the party that is probably the most ready and the most likely to benefit from an election right now. If you look at the NDP are leaderless, they're going through a leadership vote at some point. The Conservatives are sort of struggling to punch through. We have controversies with Pierre Poilievre attacking the National Police Force, essentially, and the Bloc Québécois kind of doing its thing in Quebec. And so I do think that kind of strikes me as the Liberals positioning themselves from as in a position of power here to kind of play chicken with the opposition. And if, oops, we end up kind of accidentally falling into an election campaign, maybe that would be to the benefit of Mark Carney's government.
Kathleen, what do you think the positioning is all about at this point? So we're just over 2 weeks away from the tabling of the budget.
Yeah, well, Laura just stole my line because honestly, I love a good game of election chicken stare off, and that's exactly what's happening. And it really shows the difference between someone like a Karina Gould, who used to be the House leader, to compare her to like Steve McKinnon, who is distinctly much more political and kind of carries that kind of political shiv with him everywhere he goes. Much more cut of the same kind of cloth as Dominic LeBlanc when he held that role. I mean, this is really typical. This game is played in the lead up to every federal budget. Opposition parties saying we're going to vote against before even seeing the budget, and then the government coming in saying that's ridiculous, that's reactionary. You should be more responsible to Canadians, but it's going to play out the way it is. The only mild correction I'd make to Laura's excellent analysis is that yes, I think that the Liberals do stand to do well. I do think that Conservatives are a little bit on the back heel, and potentially the Bloc too, only because of the threat. They're going in. The province of Quebec is going into a provincial election next year. I actually would say with the New Democrats, and this is the correction, Laura, is just that honestly, we got nothing left to lose. Like, bring on the election. We might not be able to have the money to run a big campaign, but truthfully, honestly, we have nowhere to go but up. We've already lost party status. And in fact, because of the opening that Prime Minister Carney has made by shifting so much to the right, he's opened up this massive left flank that actually, in terms of the ground game and the historical nature of the strength in some of the provinces of New Democrats, we could actually maybe even pick up a few seats. So, not saying that I want an election either. I think it's a waste of money, and Canadians want us to get to work on the job that they hired us to do, which is making life more affordable. But I think 7, we could only go higher from here.
Okay, I take the point. I would ask though on Larissa, on the sort of opening that might exist, sort of bridging what Kathleen's saying with the budget talk. Do you think that will be the case come the budget? And I ask because of the relative positioning of both the Conservatives of the Bloc. Like you heard from the minister, the Bloc was the first out of the gate after saying initially at the election that they intended to support they'd give them a year. That actually they've seen nothing to be able to support the budget. And that was at a time where the narrative around the budget, as it is a bit today, was very confusing. You had austerity and investment at the same time that the Prime Minister was talking about. Then you have the Conservatives laying out a list of demands, which we know there is, particularly where the size of the deficit is, that they want it to be no greater, I think, than $42 billion. Like, that's not going to happen. So that leaves the NDP. And does that mean something different for the budget than maybe the rhetoric around the Carney government would lead us to believe?
Yeah, so like leading into the budget, we heard the Prime Minister say both that it was going to be an austerity budget, he said it in French, and that he said once it's going to have generational investment. And when he said that, my ears sort of perked up and I thought, God, that sounds expensive. And I love Kathleen, but I disagree that the NDP has nowhere to go. Ask Kim Campbell. 7 seats would look pretty good for Kim Campbell. I don't think the NDP can afford an election. The Conservatives certainly can. I mean, that's the one marker that the Conservatives always outperform the Liberals. They always raise more money, and that's the number one kind of, are we ready to go? We're organized and we raise money. So the Conservatives could go to an election. The House leader was saying, the opposition's not reading the room. They're not reading the mood of the people. I think he's not reading the room. If he's going to start throwing this out there, we've had, I think, 5 provincial elections in the last year. We had some major cities have elections. Quebec's going to election next year. Canadians are tired. They want stability. Mark Carney promised stability. He promised he was going to take on Donald Trump. He promised our economic indicators were going to, get better and turn the tide. He hasn't delivered on those things. I think he's got a massive task in front of him with this budget to deliver on the things he promised Canadians he was going to deliver on. Food prices are up, rent is up, right. Inflation is up, and he's got a lot to tackle in this budget. And I agree. I don't know if it's going to be a spending or austerity budget, but he needs the NDP support.
Louis, how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I've got some breaking news from your viewers, Sebastian, that there will be no election this fall over the budget. I mean, let's be serious here. If you take a step back, though, I think the more important question that we need to look at, or at least the Liberals have to look at, is as to whether they're able to leverage this budget to sort of get a better hold of the general political narrative right now in Ottawa, because we know over the last 6 months that narrative has not been very positive for them. You know, we were promised big things, and they seem to be under-delivering, especially on the U.S. file. Mark Carney said he would stand up to Donald Trump. There would be no tariffs, and this would be wrapped up in a couple of weeks. That has not happened. So I think there's an opportunity here for the Liberals to be able to leverage this budget, and maybe, who knows, there are rumors now that there may be a deal on aluminum, steel, and energy with the United States. You could maybe, you know, combine that into a 1-2 punch, where you've got that deal that's being announced maybe around the APEC in South Korea next week, and then maybe a couple of days or a week later, you've got the budget, where you're able to sort of grab Canadians' attention once again and really sort of provide them with that forward-looking vision to get a handle again on the general narrative, because they don't seem to have a strong handle on that right now.
I want to follow up with you, because often when I would be dealing with you in your old capacity working for the government, it was on the Minister of Industry, right? So you've got a lot of experience on the Stellantis file. I just want to play a clip from question period between the Leader of the Opposition and the new Minister of Industry, Mélanie Joly, and then we'll talk around about that.
I met this morning with the Canadian CEO of GM. I was in conversation with the head of the labor union of Unifor, and I also talked to Doug Ford, and I talked to Vic Fideli. We will make sure that we fight for these jobs.
She talked to this person, and she talked to that person, and she talked to this other person, and she talked, and she talked, and they talk, and they talk, and nothing gets done, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are tired of talk. They want their job.
So I just have a few minutes to get everyone in, but I do want to talk to all of you. Louis, what are your thoughts on how the sort of Stellantis decision and now GM, I know they're not perfectly analogous, but like how big of a challenge is this?
This is crazy, Vashi. I mean, just think back about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, we were so high on the auto industry in this country, we were literally like going for the fence. Less than 2 years later, the wheels seem to be coming off the cart, and excuse the pun here. I think Pierre Poilievre, and I hate to say this, but I think Pierre Poilievre's got a point there. And, you know, the Carney brand is action, it's focus, it's right now, it's let's get things done. And you've got the industry minister saying that she talked to one person, talked to another, and whatnot. This is going to be very, very tough. You know, the auto industry is going through a crisis moment. Obviously, we've heard about this potential deal with the United States, which does not include the auto industry, by the way. And when Mélanie Joly talks about having, you know, these contractual obligations with these companies, whereby they need to guarantee, or they took undertakings to guarantee a certain number of jobs in Canada, that's all well and good. But you know how these things work. The company bails, goes to the United States, people lose their jobs, and then you go to court over the obligations and the contracts, and that can take for years. And so politically speaking, it's very, very difficult to see the upside on this when the industry is going through a crisis, particularly in Ontario, but also here in Quebec.
Larissa, what do you think about that?
I agree. And I actually thought the same thing. When I saw the minister's scrum earlier with reporters and then her performance in question period, her answer was, I talked to this guy, I talked to that guy. Nothing's getting done. And, you know, I saw Lisa Raitt on the show yesterday, and she said something that really stuck with me, and that was that Donald Trump doesn't want any car made in Canada. Any car that's sold to Americans, he doesn't want any part of it made in Canada. And when Stellantis made their announcement last week, I actually watched the U.S. news of the Stellantis CEO celebrating that investment in the States. And he said a really also glaring thing. He said, our number one priority is the United States. That's her number one market. This is the biggest investment they've ever made in the U.S. And that's not going to change. And once that investment goes there, it's not coming back. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg for our auto industry. And, you know, frankly, the government's going to be scrambling here because they don't know what they're going to do.
Kathleen?
the story is far from written. The company still has many different ways to be squeezed, whether it comes from the Minister of Industry or not through her suit. I think, sure, maybe that's unlikely. There's still consumer power, which I can talk about ad nauseum. But actually, what I want to focus on is the one card that the government still has to play. And they can just open up Canadian manufacturing plants and the footprint that exists to Chinese manufacturers. Like it either is going to be cars made in the States or cars made in China. So what happens if they just say, okay, we're going to reverse our mandate on Chinese-made EVs, convince them to actually make them in Canada, and then those Canadian workers just slide on over to making those Chinese EVs, but in Canada, made by Canadian workers. I mean, the company still is going to be squeezed. And I remind you that it was just a bit more than 15 years ago, that every Canadian in Canada held a GoFundMe campaign for Chrysler, Stellantis now called, and gave them $100 out of their own jeans to basically say, hey, we want you to get through this financial crisis. We want to give you a leg up. And so them turning their back on Canada now and moving, as apparently GM is as well today, the news from today, Canadians know that if you want to sell here, you've got to make here. And that means you can't just turn your back on the workers. And if that void is going to be filled by China or some other manufacturer, well, Canadians can vote with their wallet.
Well, if you think we've got it bad with Donald Trump right now, just wait until we start, importing Chinese EVs in Canada. I mean, we
not
see
complex,
nothing.
Louis, not importing, making them here.
Well, both would be very complex. Last word to you, Laura. Yeah. Sorry, I got about 30 seconds. My apologies.
Well, look, I mean, at this stage, outrage is sort of the only card that the governments have to play. And while, Melanie Joly may be criticized for, saying that she's talked to the head of these car companies, that's essentially what Doug Ford is saying as well in Ontario. And he's a progressive conservative premier, right? I mean, they're all kind of trying to talk tough, threaten to sue, say they're going to fight for jobs. And that's really kind of the only line that these governments have, and they probably do have some sort of legal recourse at some stage, but that could be very time consuming. And so I think that does put more pressure on the Carney government to strike these deals with the Trump administration on steel and aluminum, energy, and eventually, hopefully, auto. But I mean, I think this is sort of the greatest challenge for the government, both provincial and federal, in dealing with the auto industry and a U.S. administration that wants to decimate our auto industry here in Canada.
I've got to leave it on that note. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Louis Hammond, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone. We're back in a moment. Back to one of our top stories. Last week, President Trump announced he'd be meeting soon and in person with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss an end to the war on Ukraine. Trump even announced the meeting would take place in Hungary. But Reuters is reporting that meeting is off the books after a preliminary call between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. That call apparently didn't go well. Here's what German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius exclusively told CTV News on what that cancellation says about what Putin really wants.
Donald Trump is trying something, the one or the other, but Putin pretends to be willing and to agree to negotiate, but at the end he doesn't. And what he's doing all the time is gaining time, winning time to gain territory in Ukraine and to create facts. And this is what we should face realistically.
More Power Play just ahead. We're back in a moment. Lots more to come tonight on CTV News Channel. Your top headlines are just ahead. That does do it for Power Play this evening. I'm Vashti Capellas. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you same time, same place tomorrow.